Thanks for staying with us here on News Talk. Bruce DePoy with you on this Wednesday. Negotiations between the NFL and players have broken off, and no one knows how long the impasse will last. There's no need for football fans to panic just yet, but if the two sides dig in, the 2011 season may not start on time this fall. J.I. Halsell is here. He's an ESPN 980 NFL insider. He served as a salary cap analyst for the Washington Redskins. Welcome back. It is great to have you here. Where do things stand right now? I get the sense that negotiations broke off, the lockout kicked in, and publicly anyway, there's no sign that there's really anything going on. We're
really in a holding pattern right now in terms of any movement towards a deal or towards this getting resolved. We have a court date next Wednesday, April 6th, with Judge Susan Nelson up in Minnesota regarding a possible injunction that could allow for the players to come back into the facilities while this all gets kind of worked out behind the scenes in the courtrooms. So from a casual fan perspective, if you want to see an off-season and a training camp and ultimately a season, you're rooting for an injunction from Judge Nelson. So that'll be next Wednesday. If the players lose that injunction hearing, then the lockout continues and the momentum shifts to the ownership because now they can continue their lockout, and ultimately the lockout is designed to basically break what is now the trade association, because they're no longer a union, to break the trade association because players are going to have to pay their bills. And if those paychecks aren't coming in, if this doesn't get resolved anytime soon, and we know how lengthy a court battle can be, or how lengthy this negotiation has been, then it serves to benefit the owners in terms of getting a deal favorable to them.
You make an interesting point there. I think as fans, we tend to think of the players as being wealthy. And true, most players make more than most fans. But that doesn't mean everyone gets the marquee contract, the 7 figures, the ginormous bonus. Many of them are closer to earth in terms of their salary, and paying the bills can become an issue over time.
It's a little bit of a misnomer to say that this whole labor dispute is a battle of billionaires versus millionaires, because the fact of the matter is that most NFL players make less than $1 million over the course of a season. Now, don't get me wrong, the rookie minimum in terms of their base salary last year was $320,000. Relative to the average American, it's a lot of money. But also, keep in mind that unfortunately a lot of ball players, they might make $320 a year, but they also may spend $330, $340 a year. And so unfortunately, in spite of their large amount of salary, these guys are living paycheck to paycheck, just like the average American is, particularly in this economy. And that's
once you build in
taxes,
payment on a nice house, maybe some frills like a fancy car or a boat, whatever. Suddenly you
commission to your agent.
All those things.
It adds up.
If you have a housekeeper, nanny, those things, you're writing big checks on a regular basis.
It adds up, but don't get me wrong. I get how the average fan who might be making $35,000, $45,000, $50,000 a year can't identify with a ball player who plays a child's game and makes $320,000. I get that, but the fact of the matter is these guys live paycheck to paycheck, and if the lockout can continue, these guys aren't receiving paychecks, and they're going to begin to look to their leadership to get a deal done.
And that's the context in which I was sort of raising it. Not boo-hoo, these guys, how do they survive on $500,000? It's the
element of leverage and strategy.
It's the extent to which pain starts to be felt on one side or the other, and who might be a little bit more suddenly flexible about a deal.
Absolutely. It works on both sides of the negotiating table, because when you look at what was called the TV lockout fund that the owners had negotiated with the networks, whereby they would still receive payments from the networks even if there was a lockout that precluded a 2011 season. Well, same thing with owners. They have bills, corporate bills that have to be paid. And what this lockout fund would have provided is income for them to pay these bills, even though there's no product on the field. Now, that lockout fund was subsequently overturned by the same court in Minnesota that will be hearing the arguments next week about an injunction. So that was a source of income taken away from the owners, which then shifted the momentum to the union, or now the trade association. So, at the end of the day, both sides have bills to pay. Both sides want to continue to receive income. And so that's why it's beneficial to both sides to come to an agreement, particularly before the summer and also the fall.
I want to open the phone lines because I want to give fans a chance to talk about what's happening right now vis-a-vis the NFL. Join us if you're watching us live in the 10 o'clock hour. We certainly welcome your questions and your comments as we talk with J.I. Halsell, a former Redskins salary cap analyst and a current ESPN 980 NFL insider. Join us by calling 703-387-1020. As always, we will go to the phones as your questions and comments come in. I like this idea, at the risk of being naive, and I'm just a fan. I like this idea of an injunction because it sort of, to me, reflects the fundamental premise that these people are going to be together again at some point. Why not keep mini camps, training, all the regular stuff going while they bicker about money? Ultimately, there will be some deal. And why should there be any time loss that diminishes the product or in any way jeopardizes what we all want to see, and that's the return of football come fall?
Don't get me wrong, I think both sides ultimately want to have a season in the fall. I think both sides understand the negative repercussions of not having a season. But again, going back to how this is, at its simplistically, this is an issue of leverage. And so from the owner's perspective, while they do want, a season and an off season to occur, they want to be able to gain leverage in getting a deal that's favorable to them, which is why they don't want an off season right now, why they want, for lack of a better word, the players to not receive those paychecks and to suffer to a certain extent so that they give in. But from a casual fan perspective, as I mentioned earlier, if you want to see an off season, you want to see training camp, you want to see a season, and if you don't care about kind of all the court wrangling, so on and so forth, you're hoping for this injunction. Now, like anything else with lawyers and courts, an injunction ruling could come next week, but obviously the losing party is going to appeal any decision that's made, and so the question then becomes is, while the appellate process is going on, can the injunction still occur? And so while the appellate process is going on, you have an off season, or while the appellate process is going on, you don't have the injunction. And so that remains to be seen. So you're hoping simplistically that an injunction comes to be or comes into effect, sometime shortly after next Wednesday, and then you get an off season.
To what extent is the energy here coming from the owner's sense that in the last deal that got done, the players made out a little better than they did?
Oh, that's the root of the issue. That's why the owners opted out of the deal. The kind of misconception about this whole labor dispute is that the players are being greedy, when in actuality it was the owners who opted out of the collective bargaining agreement because they said the economic model was not working and their margins were getting squeezed, basically saying that while the league continues to increase its revenue, its costs, particularly its player costs, are outgaining those revenues, thereby squeezing the margins. So it's really an issue of ownership saying that the money is not where it needs to be, particularly to grow the game long term.
You wonder what that means. I mean, to what extent has there been skirmishing over the accounting, that show me your books, prove your case kind of dynamic? Yeah,
that financial transparency issue was really, particularly as we got to the end of the extension period where they were in mediation and trying to negotiate a deal, financial transparency in terms of the owners opening up their books became a really prominent issue. Now, one can make the argument, though, that whether it's getting 5 years of historical data or 10 years of historical data, what the union wants to see is, where do you anticipate the league's revenues to be going forward? And it's an interesting issue, and probably the biggest issue as it relates to the money part of this labor dispute, in that historically the players have received a percentage of the revenue, and that was how it was pegged. Now, the proposal that the owners put on the table before the talks broke down basically gave the players a fixed number. So it was no longer a percentage. So if the revenues increased exponentially, this number was going to be pegged, and so the players weren't going to get any piece of this economic upside.
Understandably, I think they would quarrel with that.
So they had an issue with that. And so now this, more so than the financial transparency issue, it's this economic upside issue that is really, if they can come to a resolution on that, that could go a long way towards getting a deal done.
And the date to watch for is April 6th?
April 6th.
Talking with ESPN 980 NFL insider J.I. Halsell. We'll pause here, we'll take a break, and we'll come back with more News Talk.